All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Zapata. I'm one of the founders of Clearloop. And today we decided that we're going to try to put a little bit of school back in session. So I'm going to try to go over how Clearloop works and also a little bit more context around the market. So this is my attempt at trying to showcase a little bit about what we're dealing with, what we talking about, hey guys, what we're talking about in terms of how do we get more companies to help us invest in building more solar projects so that we can clean up the grid and what exactly that means. So we're gonna get started here. This is my, I guess we'll call it Clean Energy and Carbon Markets 101. So this, hopefully, y'all can hear me. Can everybody hear me? Hopefully, yes. And carbon markets. So this is Clearloop. All right. Let me know. Can people give me a thumbs up if you can hear us? Let me know. All right. So here we go. So this is Clean Energy and Carbon Markets 101 per Clearloop. All right, so we know that there are certain things in our economy that are helping us, that have our carbon footprint. So in the United States right now, the number 1 and 2 drivers to our carbon footprint are USA, carbon footprint, are 2 main drivers. They're the biggest ones. They're transportation, and hopefully y'all can read this, and if not, then I'm just gonna be really proud of myself for writing on a whiteboard. Transportation and the power sector, electricity, the electricity grid. So it's these 2 things are responsible for more than half of the carbon emissions in the United States today. Let me see if I can make this okay. And so that means that we need to decarbonize those. We need to clean those up. The good news is that we have the technology to be able to clean up both the transportation and the electricity grid. The transportation, as we know, everything is sort of getting electrified, so that means everything from Teslas and other electric vehicles to even scooters and other things that can be electrified. And then on the grid, on the electricity grid, we know that we have solar and wind and other renewable energy resources and technologies that can help us clean up the grid. Because right now, the way that most of us are operating our daily lives are turning on our lights. We don't even think about it, but the thing that's happening is that we are burning fossil fuels in order to get this electricity. So if we stop burning fossil fuels, we'll stop creating carbon, and that means that our carbon footprint will be reduced, and that means that we'll be able to beat climate change. So all of those things are interconnected. So at Clearloop, we're really focused on this aspect, the electricity grid, because it's about 28% of the US carbon footprint. We have the technology to be able to deploy, and we should be able to do that effectively at scale so we can decarbonize our grid. So we know solar and wind works, and we're only at I think less than 2% of solar generating power in the United States today. We have a long ways to go, which means there's a great deal of opportunity for us to keep growing. So how it works today. So in the US, we have, how do we build more solar projects is the question. So we have solar and wind projects. So we have, in the United States, we have 2 sort of different options for companies to be able to buy and help finance clean energy. And I'll promise to make this fun. So we have solar projects. How do we get more solar projects? Right now, like 99% of solar projects and clean energy projects in the United States are financed by something called a power purchase agreement. So that power purchase agreement basically is responsible from that creation for financing the construction of the solar projects that we see across the country today. The reason why those are so important is because we've been able to show demand for clean energy. So the private sector has done a really good job of showing that there's need for more clean energy access in the United States, and they've created this thing called the PPA, Power Purchase Agreement, that allows developers like our friends over at Silicon Ranch to then go and build these projects at scale across the country. And so what we're seeing today is that there are some limits to the PPA. The limits include, so the way the PPA works, before we talk about the limits, is basically a company like a big tech company like a Google or Microsoft or Amazon decides that they are going to go have green power, and so what they're doing is that they are they're signing on to this contract, power purchase agreement, saying that they are going to be purchasing power from that facility that the developer builds for the next 20, 30, 40 years, sometimes 15 years. And so with that contract, the developer can then go to the bank or to the private lender and say, you know, a great company with a great credit rating has signed this contract telling us that they're going to be buying the power from us for this facility. Let us borrow the money for us to build it because we'll make that money back. It's guaranteed by this contract. And so that's been really helpful and very successful. And so what we've seen is that's why you've seen Google and Facebook be able to make all these announcements, because they have the ability and the credit rating to go do that, and they've been responsible for a great deal of solar projects and wind projects that have been developed across the United States in the past decade, which is awesome. However, what's happened is that there's only so many of those tech companies, and so in these companies that have that kind of credit rating, so it limits. There are some limits to who can be part of the financing of the solar project. So we want more companies. So what Clearloop is trying to do is sort of open up and learn from this power purchase agreement, and basically say, how can we open up so that we have more companies joining in here? And then the other thing is that it also, unfortunately, about 85% of solar projects today are in 10 states in this country. That means that not only are some of these states getting left behind, but when we turn on our lights in different parts of the country, it has a different environmental impact. And so that means is that we don't have equitable access to clean energy, and there's sort of a lopsided way in which we are going through our grid. So that means that we need to figure out how do we rectify that, because everybody in the United States should have access to clean energy. It shouldn't matter where you live. You should have access to this clean energy. So how do we bring that to more parts of the country? And the reason for that is that the PPAs, what's the big driver for them is the wholesale price of energy. So developers are building in the places where they can sell that power for the most money, which makes sense. And so how can we start responding to some of those things that we've learned, and really build more and get more opportunities for these solar projects? And we're talking solar here because Clearloop is primarily focused on solar. It's an abundant resource across the country, so that's our focus. So how can we get more of those built in these places like Tennessee that are getting left behind so far? So that is where we have so Clearloop, what we're doing is we're learning from what has already worked before. We know that we can clean up the grid. That's our low-hanging fruit right here. We want to, and so how do we do that? We build more solar projects. How do we finance and bring more money and more people to be able to fund those projects in places around the country where it's not happening today, and that wholesale price is not the driver? We make it all about the carbon footprint. And so if we can focus, so our focus is let's build where we can get the biggest bang for our carbon buck. So basically, if we are going after the dirty grids, because it takes less number of watts to be able to build in those places. And so that means that we can actually build a facility in West Virginia that has just as much of an environmental impact as a bigger facility would in a place like California or in the Northeast. And so we want to make sure that we're going after the dirtiest grids, because the value is really around the carbon offset, the way that we're avoiding, the way that we're valuing the thing that companies are buying into is about the carbon offset as opposed to the power that is getting generated and what companies or what utilities are willing to pay for that power. So I know that that's a lot, and I'm probably saying a lot, but essentially what it means is that what Clearloop is trying to bring to the market is a way to build more solar projects that responds to some of the limitations about what kind of companies can be part of this and what kind of places and what communities we can build in. So if we change the incentive around and focus really on the carbon, then we are looking at the parts of the country, sort of the middle part of the country, the Midwest and the Sun Belt, where the sun is good, but we're not getting as many solar project investments, and really try to accelerate that and bring more companies to be able to do that. The way that we do that is essentially, instead of having companies sign on to a power purchase agreement to buy the power back from the developer, what we are saying is using a very classic sort of carbon finance model, which is the way that people are used to buying carbon offsets, so like a tree. Lots of companies out there are looking for ways to invest in ways to reduce their greenhouse gases. And so what we're doing is we're saying to those companies, what you're doing is you're putting down a set of money, so between, let's call it $9 to $12 a metric ton of carbon, and what that gets you is that builds 30 to 37 watts of new solar. And what that will do is that will then, by paying this money, we're building this new solar, what that will do, and think about it as a light bulb, what that will do is it will reduce 1 metric ton of CO2 over the operating life of that light bulb, of those 30 to 37 watts. And the reason there's a range here is because depending on where in the country you're building, you have to build more or less to get that same amount, because our grid is not equally dirty. And so that means that what we are doing at Clearloop is that we have this pot of money that the company has paid to offset their carbon footprint, and then we're able to then take that money, just think about it as, when you're buying a house, if for those of you lucky enough to have bought a house, you put some money down, and then your bank or a mortgage lender is willing to let you borrow the rest of the money for you to purchase it. And so that's what we're doing. We're taking this money, this pot of money that has been exchanged to us, that has been paid to us, so that the company can get the carbon credit. They get the environmental attribute for us building this facility, and what then we can do with this pot of money is go to the bank and say, all right, now we have money down, can we borrow the rest of it so we can actually build the facility? So instead of having this long-term contract that assures a company that they're going to be able to do this, we have money in hand to then go and finance these solar projects. Why that's important, why that's interesting, is because it allows us to really go after a group of companies that maybe are not willing to sign a power purchase agreement. There's a lot of startups out there that are 5 years, 10 years old. Their life span so far isn't even as big as some of these power purchase agreements call for. And then there's some companies where it's too risky, or they don't have the right credit rating or profile to be able to do that. And so we're really trying to expand this access to companies that would otherwise maybe invest in some other ways to sort of diversify the portfolio for them, so that they can buy into more ways to reduce greenhouse gases. So now we're adding clean energy capacity as another sort of tool in the toolbox for these companies, so that when they're looking to offset their carbon footprint, they may be looking at methane capture, they may be looking at buying trees and making sure that there's no deforestation, but now they can also look at Clearloop as a way to invest in new solar projects to clean up our grid, and it's accessible in the same way. And it also allows us to then go after the dirtiest grids, which means that we're going intentionally after the places, the communities that would otherwise get left behind. So that was a lot on the clean energy world and how we're trying to bring together and sort of reattach clean energy with climate solutions, and trying to make sure that we're really intentional and targeted in the places where we're building, where we're reducing greenhouse gases. And we fundamentally believe that access to clean energy is something that should be equitable across this country, that the benefits of solar power, not just from the environmental aspect of it, but from the health and economic aspect of it, those investments should be happening across our country. And we're particularly excited about bringing that here home to Tennessee, and to accelerate that in other parts, the middle parts of the country. So that's what we do, that's how we do it. I know that was a lot, so we're gonna try to unpack some of that as we go along in these little mini series that we're going to try to do. And if y'all have questions or anything, please send us a note to hello@clearloop.us. We were thrilled to be in this space, learning alongside many of you who are tuning in. And so we are excited to keep it going, and we know that sunnier days will be ahead. So thank y'all so much for checking in. Really appreciate the ones who tuned in on live, and hope that this is helpful and good context, and that you also join us along the journey for the next couple of weeks. Thank y'all.